we do have other perspectives that we would like to get before us before we go into further questions. And so I'd like to call on Don Mead, who will introduce George Saghir as a voice about economics in the region. Don?
Thanks, Walt. For our next speaker, we are fortunate to have with us Mr. George Saghir. You have read about his rich background in the financial markets of the Middle East. We in our network are mostly Americans, and we wrestle with what might be the focus of our advocacy towards the US government. With that background, we asked Mr. Saghir if he would share his thoughts about the role played by the US government's policies in the collapse of the Lebanese economy, with particular attention to the impact of our sanctions on Lebanon and Syria. Mr. Saghir, welcome. The screen is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for inviting me. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, thank you for inviting me. This is my first appearance here. I really commend the group and your mission. I'm a Christian from the Middle East, and my family moved to Syria 100 years ago, avoiding prosecution when they lived close to Armenians, and now the region continuously goes through the turmoil that is implanted in our DNA there. What we're seeing now is things I've heard from my parents and their parents, and so there's sort of nothing new. But at the same time, I think there is. I'm going to paint, sadly, a more negative outlook here, both short-term and long-term. And I'm going to do so because I view things from a completely dispassionate financial perspective, and really based on data and spreadsheets, if you wish, and of course coupled with an equally negative take on the political part as well. So, you know, addressing this type of question is really hard, because it's like walking in a movie, and if you enter late, it's kind of hard to understand it. And when is the start of this movie? And I always struggle with sort of, how far back do you want to go when you present something like this, because you really are not doing the subject justice unless you really give it that kind of perspective. My own way of doing this is really to bring it much more into the modern era. We all know the history of the region. We don't need to go there. For me, this region is really, and particularly Syria and Lebanon, I would say, let's just concentrate on that, because oil and gas and what's happening in the sort of other parts of the Middle East is well known and documented, and we can forget it for a moment. I think that why I am very negative on Syria and Lebanon is for two reasons. First, I want to go to Lebanon and discuss that for a minute. The Lebanese issue is a complex banking and finance issue. It's complex and easy. If this was a big country, and if this was a developed country, European style country, it would be in the news every single minute of every day. But it's not. It's a smaller country. And what had happened there financially has sort of been understood, but not really. I mean, you see every now and then the New York Times and the Financial Times throw a story explaining what had happened, but I don't think that they do it justice, again, because it's just a simple article. To really understand Lebanon, you really have to understand the fact that what we're suffering from today is the undoing of an unsustainable period for about 25 years, 22 years, that were helped by an unsustainable central bank policy that relied, not to get very technical on the economics, but think about it this way. This is a country that went through a long civil war. They come out of it in 1989. They hold a Taif Accord, and they essentially are searching for a magical solution to get the country to stabilize, to bring investments from overseas. And they stumble across a very attractive, sexy proposal, which is, if we can only fix a currency that has deteriorated in value multiple times. Just to put it in perspective, you're talking about a currency that used to be $1 used to buy 3.5 Lebanese pounds. By the end of the Civil War, it's trading almost 2,500. So you're talking about a massive collapse in value, which is natural, just like Syria's currency has suffered. And so the leading authority at the time, whether it's Rafiel Hariri and the new central bank head, designed this kind of very attractive policy of saying, look, you've suffered from this incredible collapse of the currency. We're going to fix it. We're going to now pull the level that exists today, which is 1,507, and we're going to promise the citizens and overseas investors, this currency is not going to move in value any longer. We're just going to keep it constant. And as they did that, for 20 odd years, they have, not very surprisingly, attracted a massive inflow of funds from largely the diaspora of Lebanon, which are extremely successful. They've left the country over almost 100 years, and particularly during the Civil War, succeeded in establishing themselves wherever they've gone. And now you have the prospect of not only a currency that is fixed in value, but the banking system offered you interest rates that exceeded the interest rates that are provided to you by any other center in the world. And so it was very hard to resist the temptation. And what had happened is that it resulted in inflows of just about averaging $6 to $7 billion a year in, year out, between the year, I would say almost like 1999 to 2019. And that inflow gave a full sense of the things that Rami talked about and the exceptionalism that Rami talked about. We all, as a Syrian citizen, myself, we all crossed the border into Lebanon, and we're like, wow, how is this happening? Yes, they have better education system. Yes, but I think what was really camouflaged, is this incredible, inflows that were coming in. And as the currency stayed extremely strong and extremely stable, the need to manufacture anything completely went by the wayside. It was much easier to import everything because the currency was kept artificially high and allowed the wrong incentives to build in a country and a society for almost 20 odd years. What you're seeing today is the unwinding of that unsustainable model in one full swoop. What you saw in 2 years, you have had an economy that was built on this 7 billion flows and a currency. In literally 24 months, you adjusted what you should have adjusted of over 22 years in a mere months. And that is extremely difficult for the average citizen, A, to understand, B, to live through. The example of what happened this morning with gas prices, I wrote an article actually when gas prices, when the October 2019 had started, I calculated the per gallon, as we live in the US, we look at it per gallon, the per gallon price of gas to fill in your car in Lebanon at the outbreak was 62 cents per gallon. This morning, they are at $3.69 per gallon. So we've gone from almost ridiculous, it was the cheapest actually in the world, to just about going over US cost in just a matter of months. That is in a country that has no public transportation. It has no busing service publicly. It has no rail service. It has nothing. And therefore, the country now is going to have to really grapple with even going to work at prices that just seemed completely, when I said at the time that 62 cents makes sense, it makes no sense, it's going to go up. No one could comprehend the price that can go from 62 cents to $3.70 in this short while. Now, we're talking about what countries can intervene and what can be done. Frankly, nothing. This is going to be a very, very difficult process, because the amount of money that is needed to close the gap, by my own calculation and by the calculation of very, very reputable firms, is anywhere between $65 billion to $90 billion. And that hole today exists on the central bank balance sheet. Essentially, someone from Mars has to send a check, close out the entire loss, but that would not solve the problem, because we are back in it again. So any help, whether it's the IMF or anybody, it's going to come from a sustainable model, i.e. what they want you to do is a set of steps that are very difficult to do today. The IMF, if they do come in, they want you to lower the public sector spending. How could you do that to a country that's reeling and sitting on its knees? You're going to go to public sector workers and tell them you're fired because I'm spending too much. So the prescription that comes with a check from Mars, what I call check from Mars, are going to be extremely difficult to swallow from them, unless anyone is prepared to just hand, without any prerequisites, without any questions, an amount of money of that sort, which I just do not see happening at all. So as far as the sanctions are concerned for Lebanon, and I'll move very quickly to Syria in a second, the sanctions for Lebanon are not really the issue. They do exist, but let's just be very clear. The sanctions for Lebanon are essentially two executive orders, one, to be more precise, that was in 2007, and following the 2001 September 11 events. In fact, September 23rd, 2001, there is one executive order that was put to impede terrorist funding. Impeding terrorist funding for Lebanon comes because Hezbollah is branded as, is designated rather, as a terrorist organization. And therefore, all the sanctions of Lebanon, if there is one, really fall under that impeding terrorist funding executive order, 13224. And that is the one that is the sort of umbrella executive order that makes the sanctions of Lebanon what they are. Do they really impede economic activity and so on? Yes. Is it marginal? Yes, because all the executive orders, the two executive orders that today exist on Lebanon, were issued in 2001 and 2007. As you know, between 2007 up to 2019, the inflows were happening at very, very large clips. And the 7 billion and the economy was doing it. So I believe that support my theory that the sanctions are not really what to blame, but what is to blame for Lebanon is again, an unsustainable business model that existed for 20 years, that came completely untied and unglued in an incredible speed to where we are today.
Well, we appreciate those views about Lebanon, and we would like to hear more comments about Syria, but our time is short. But maybe you can take just a minute or so to talk about Syria.
I will be very, very quick here. Yeah, Syria, which is where I'm really I would regard myself pretty knowledgeable on, because I happen to be from the country and followed it extremely closely during the war, is a completely different kettle of fish. This is a country that has been at odds with the United States really for a very long time. In 1979, it was designated as a state sponsor of terrorism with three other countries. Today, it is the only country in the world that is designated as a state sponsor of terrorism since 1979. Where Lebanon has one executive order by the president in terms of sanctions, Syria has 9. Syria has 9 executive orders, and it has just recently, in December 2019, has a statutes under the Caesar Act, which makes dealing in Syria incredibly difficult. And since that is a statute, a republic law, which is not just an executive order, the stumbling blocks in Syria on terms of sanctions are absolutely immense. I am short on time. I will stop here if you like, but I'm just pointing a scenario where the sanctions on Syria are extremely, extremely binding and extremely difficult. There is no way out of that civil war either for now, for reasons that needs another whole session. Sadly, as I said, I am not hopeful, both on the short term and long term. And I will stop that on that sad note, unfortunately, here.
Well, we appreciate that. It's always hard to be so somber about issues, but we hope that somehow we can contribute to finding more positive ways to deal with intractable problems, and we appreciate your insights.
Sure.